All right, now, so we are back at the base of this mountain. This time, we're going into Langston Hughes's speech that I read a couple weeks ago, though I fluffed it or kerfluffled it. I want to touch base with two excerpts from this speech regarding the obligation to act or display yourself as culturally black. So let me read the first one. The first excerpt, and the first one is: the present vogue in things Negro, although it may do as much harm as good for the budding colored artist, has at least done this: it has brought him forcibly to the attention of his own people, among whom for so long, unless the other race had noticed him beforehand, he was a prophet with little honor. That's the first excerpt, and I want you all to ponder that, and you can in the comments put what you think he meant by that. I'll read it again. The present vogue in things Negro, although it may do as much harm as good for the budding colored artist, has at least done this: it has brought him forcibly to the attention of his own people, among whom for so long, unless the other race had noticed him beforehand, he was a prophet with little honor. Okay, that's the first excerpt. The second: the Negro artist works against an undertow of sharp criticism and misunderstanding from his own group and unintentional bribes from the whites. I'll read that again. The Negro artist works against an undertow of sharp criticism and misunderstanding from his own group and unintentional bribes from the whites. And you can put in the comment sections if you like what Langston Hughes meant by that. Here's the thing when you read this speech, because again, this is one of those things where there was a Negro artist that says that they just wanted to be American and not Negro. And there are two ways to view that. The person who told Langston that they just wanted to be American was understandably likely a person who was not born into slavery. And so they wanted to embrace this new world. What's also true is that Langston was probably at an older enough age to understand that you cannot force an assimilation that wasn't happening throughout the country. See, at the height of the Harlem Renaissance was not just the Great Migration, but some of the reasons for it. There was Jim Crow. There were high levels of lynchings just for your skin color. So at this time in history, it would have been a little bit harder to deny that you're black because that feature was there. Even with skin bleaching, sometimes those Negroid features could still show themselves. These are the two excerpts that I picked because they're telling two different stories as to what Langston Hughes wanted people to know. Because in the 1970s, they started to push that Harlem was vogue. But was it really vogue? In that first excerpt with the present vogue in things Negro, although it may do as much harm as good for the budding colored artist, has at least done this: it had brought him forcibly to the attention of his own people, among whom for so long, unless the other race had noticed him beforehand, he was a prophet with little honor. So what I think Langston was saying is that this allowed people to choose, us finally as a culture to choose how we were going to add to the American landscape. This is what I think that he's referring to with this quote, and that there was a time when there were no Negro movements, where primarily Negro artists could express themselves and show culture. I mean, people had published novels and poems and things like that, but there was no full countrywide or worldwide Negro movement. Because you got to remember, there were people like Claude McKay who came from the Caribbean, who had come for the Harlem Renaissance. I mean, you could say vaudeville was, but vaudeville went out of its way to be racist and blatantly racist. Whereas though colorism and racism existed in the Harlem Renaissance was not wholly racist like vaudeville. And we can have like interesting discussions about that if you all would like. I think that he was talking about the vogue reckoning of us as a culture and what we now call the Harlem Renaissance, what the movement was going to do around the world for black people. Not although it was a United States issue, but around the world, since artists were coming from all over the place. The second one reverberates today and reminds me of all the people who complained in 2023 about not being paid enough in Hollywood. The Negro artist works against an undertow of sharp criticism and misunderstanding from his own group and unintentional bribes from the whites. That last part, are you sure that it was all unintentional? And I think this comes from the fact, if you know who Carl Van Vechten was, there's a few actual genuine white patrons of the Harlem Renaissance. So I'm not going to say that there were no non-blacks who didn't patronize the arts. But for all intents and purposes, I think that Langston Hughes convinced himself that it was unintentional. And since I didn't live in that time, perhaps it was. Whereas we know today, black people, whether in music, whether in slave movies that come out every election, are put out to denigrate themselves to those same tired stereotypes, even when you have a rise in black billionaires and this thing that people call black excellence that I even question when we're at each other's throats. But I'm not going to get into that in this video. And interlopers that come in with the intention of making things good, but they only make them worse. No offense. I believe full-heartedly that you can be non-black and appreciate black culture. Don't misunderstand me if you're watching this video. Because I have friends who are not black, or have been acquainted with lots of people who are not black that understand black history as well as I do. And why make that effort if it's not their culture? Because they care. Okay. The first half of that, sharp criticism and misunderstanding from his own group, to me represents at that time for Langston skepticism of the movement, meaning that either black people understood that it was an internal lie because of its colorism, or black people understood that they were less than 100 years out of slavery and and they needed to toe a line. You got to remember, you're moving to the cities. You're coming there from cotton plantations, from any plantation back home off of sharecropping to nothing. And so while Harlem was a beautiful thing and it gave you a culture for the first time that you could embrace with de facto segregation, because that's what existed in the North. That's why there was a black Harlem, an Italian Harlem, and a Spanish Harlem. Because the segregation was there. Despite having that skepticism coming from that migration and having to travel up was legitimate, given that people just wanted to just have a job to eat, to survive. And the North is a little colder than the South. So of course, the Negro artist is going to take criticism at that time for their own people, because they were barely out of slavery and was figuring out as a group who we were going to be. If I applied this quote today, Hollywood is the definite, because we go in all the time on those slave movies in particular, which is one of my pet peeves, because I personally believe they one is released every election to keep people upset. Now, that's just my feeling about that. Some movies, some civil rights, something, stay angry. If you're angry, you'll vote this or you'll vote that. We know it happens. I would ask you to ponder those two excerpts. That's why I read them. Because I can't be the only one going back through Harlem Renaissance writings and seeing parallels between the warnings we got from some of those artists and the negative aspects of our cultures, particularly at the end of 2023, with the rise in black female celebrities saying they're proud to be black, but yet still putting on blonde wigs. Am I the only one making these connections? Before I let you go, I think I have a question. Is there a cultural obligation in this time, based on being 100 years past Harlem, to always engage in and support black culture alone? Why or why not? Thank you all so much for listening. Have a great day.